What's up, guys? Welcome to a new episode.
Whoa, sorry about that.
No problem. Welcome to a new
recoil.
episode of the Young Guns podcast. We have a special guest, Jason Myrtetus of the Flyers Broadcast Network. So thank you so much, Jason, for coming on today.
Anytime, boys. Looking forward to it.
So we all know that, the Flyers were expected to go after Johnny Gaudreau. And let's start off with that topic because I know a lot of people are tuning in terms of, trying to find out, what exactly went down with Philadelphia. And we just want to start off by asking, what were your thoughts essentially when, the Flyers were rumored to go after Johnny Gaudreau at the very start?
Well, I think initially it's kind of one of those like low-hanging fruit things that, player X grew up in this area, was a fan of said team. The automatic assumption a lot of times is player X would love to go home and play there. I find that most of the time that's bullshit. Like, look at Mike Trout. He stayed in Anaheim. He's played in exactly one playoff series. He loves coming home and going to Eagles games and Sixers games and all that, but he doesn't want to play here because you don't want to, for lack of a better term, shit where you eat. You don't want to taint home if you don't perform, and separation of work and where you're from. Now Gaudreau did want to come here. That's the difference, and wanted to play here and be close to family. His wife's pregnant with their first kid and wanted to get back closer to home. But the Flyers had to look at it from the standpoint of, okay, do we add this player now who's 29, and do we add this player that's going to be get max term 7 years and $10 million a year when the team was 41 points out of a playoff spot and have a lot of other holes in areas they need to shore up before they go out and buy, the hot sports car. Bill Meltzer on my Flyers Daily podcast kind of referred to it as, you live in a house that's got a leaking foundation. It's got some plumbing issues and some electrical issues. It's not the time to go out and buy a sports car and put it in the driveway. You got to fix your house first. And I think that's what the Flyers were incumbent upon doing. Plus, I was never really in favor of it from the sense is I don't like to spend that kind of money on a 29-year-old winger. I just don't. Yeah. So to me, I got caught up in it. And I would have loved to watch Gaudreau every night because he's a sensational player. But it wasn't the right time for them to be in on a player like that, considering all elements of this team and roster building and salary cap management and all of those things.
Yeah, and I think I would tend to agree on that. I think a lot of us were surprised at the beginning, towards the end of it when he ended up signing at Columbus that he didn't end up in New Jersey or Philly. And I think that there was rumors that Chuck Fletcher wasn't in on him either, that they were looking in a different direction and they weren't necessarily going for him. I just think I look at this Philly team, especially over the last couple of years, and kind of paying attention to where they are and the struggles they've been through. And I think like you mentioned, Jason, they're kind of in a different position. They're not necessarily a team fighting for a playoff spot. They're not necessarily a team that's competitive every night. Last year they struggled a lot, and I think there was a lot of issues there that I don't know have necessarily been addressed. You look at their decor, it's still not the most impressive thing in the world. And even in terms of offense, I don't think they've necessarily improve that aspect either. So I think for Philly, like you said, you kind of have to, you shouldn't go out and buy a sports car if you haven't fixed your house, kind of like what you said. And I don't think Philly's addressed they haven't addressed any of their needs essentially, or if they have, it's been very minimal. So, and I don't know if bringing in John Tortorella is going to help that, at least for the short term. I don't know about the long term, but for the short term, I don't know if that necessarily helps.
Well, I think a big thing with Torts is, and part of the issue and why fans are so upset is the message. The message was aggressive retool, and It was anything but that. And if you set an expectation for something to be something and they don't deliver on it, then if you expect a team to be good and they suck, you're pissed off. If you expect a team to stink and they're good, you're elated. It's all about expectations, and that expectation was set. And, you can point to guys, whether it's, the ability to go out and go after DeBrincat or the ability to go after Gaudreau or whoever it might be. That would have been really aggressive. But I think when they, got to the end of the season and realized that where they were, they had to, I think the term that Chuck Fletcher used in his free agency day press conference was the right one. this has got to be a year of stabilization under Torts to reset a culture, a work ethic, and all of those things, and see where guys are. You got to find out, trading Travis Konechny or trading Ivan Provorov. It's easy to say that when their last couple of seasons haven't been great, but that's not the time to trade them because their value is not great. So you got to see what these guys are under a new coach and have that year of stabilization. They did, if Ryan Ellis is healthy, that's a huge if, obviously. Played 4 games last year. And then all of a sudden their defense does look good and it does look deep because then you have Deangelo probably as a third pairing guy and a power PP1 guy on the right side, along with Cam York. And it probably bumps Justin Braun out of the lineup. And then you have Ellis and Provorov on the top pair. I worry a little bit about Deangelo on the top pair, but let's be honest. The guy played top pair minutes last year. Now he played with Jacob Slavin, who's a really good player on the team that gave up the 7th fewest goals in the league. And he's not a defensive stalwart by any stretch of the imagination. But part of the reason for their defensive struggles is that they play too much defense. They don't have the puck enough. They're not in the offensive zone enough. And with Deangelo, you will get more of that. So I think the defense is better, but so much of where they're going to go this year is predicated on injuries. And you have guys like Ryan Ellis, who's a huge question mark. I wouldn't expect him to be ready for the beginning of the season. Like Sean Couturier, who's going to be 29 years old, coming off back surgery. Like Joel Farabee, who had a surgery in the offseason, won't be ready for the start. And then the attrition of injuries in season, because last year, they had the 3rd most man games lost in the NHL, and they were huge pieces that they were missing. They were missing their top 3 centers at one point, and their number 1 pairing right side defenseman. That's an albatross. So what they're going to be in stabilization, they got to be a team that controls what they can control, and that's how you play. And then you see which guys can get their trajectory moving back in the right direction, like Konechny, like Provorov. And if you can get those those players pointed back in the right direction developmentally wise, then you could be, taking bigger steps than you think.
Yeah.
And we all know like the John Tortorella, signing as the new head coach of the Philadelphia Flyers. Some people loved it, some people didn't. We know Chris was one of those people that loved that hiring. And as a Flyers fan, what were your thoughts essentially when the news broke out?
I was beating the drum for this guy since like 2006 to be here at some point. And it's weird because I've been a media member for 28 years. And a lot of people going, he abuses the media. I've always found him entertaining. I think he's a really good coach. And there's a lot of narratives about Torts that just simply aren't true. And it's probably because of the crassness with which he dealt with the people that report on him. But, one of the narratives obviously is that players hate playing for him. It's total bullshit. I talked to 13 guys that played for him. One of them was Cam Atkinson, obviously, and other guys that aren't on the Flyers, and they love playing for him. Now, not every guy's going to like every coach, but he's a guy that when you're actually playing for him, there's going to be points where you don't like him. You're going to think he's a son of a bitch, but he's going to push you beyond your comfort level and to get you to break through barriers of play and a level of play that maybe you didn't think you could get to. That's one thing. Another thing is older coach, they hate young guys. They don't develop young talent. He's developed young talent all throughout his career. Going back to Tampa with Marty St. Louis, an undrafted player that they signed in the Hall of Fame now, all the way through into Columbus with Seth Jones and Werenski. And Werenski is a player that doesn't play with a lot of structure. Somebody had tweeted me the other day and said, I can't wait for them to make Cam York a shot blocker. And I said the same way he ruined Zach Werenski. That's one of those narratives about Torts that just isn't true. And then the other one is that he burns so hot that he's not going to last long. Well, his average length of tenure is 4.7 years. The average length of tenure of a head coach in the NHL is 2.6 years. Yeah. He has a 6-year stay, a 5-year stay, and a 7-year stay on his coaching resume. Only one short one. That was the 1 year in Vancouver and burned out. But I think he's the exact kind of guy to reestablish a culture here. I can't wait to have to deal with him day in and day out. I may change my tune on that at points because he can be tough. But to me, it's the right coach for the right time for this team. For no doubt, I preferred Trotz over everybody, but Trotz wasn't into coaching this year. Yeah. So The next best guy in my eyes was John Tortorella.
Chris?
Yeah, let's
Yeah,
hear your
well, I
thoughts.
mean, what I was gonna, yeah, I mean, John, I think he's one of the best coaches in the league. And this speaking personally, I mean, I don't know how other athletes would respond to this, but I think when a coach is very aggressive and very vocal and calls you out and says things as it is and is very straight up, I think personally I excel in when someone gives me comments like that. And I'm pretty sure when it comes to pro athletes, I wouldn't see why they would take it the wrong way. Uh, I
Dude,
think
I totally agree with you. That's the other
yeah,
thing. Um, elite athletes are used to being pushed, right?
Yeah.
They just are. You don't
yeah.
get to be an elite athlete without people really pushing you to knock down barriers of development and, growing your game. It's just the way it is. And this notion that we can't yell at anybody anymore, like, no, you can, and it does work. And I agree with you. A bunch of the players that I talked to played for them. One of the things they loved, they said, you always knew where you stood. There are coaches that just bunker in their office pissed off at you, but never tell you or don't tell you why. Torts ain't one of those guys. If it's in his head, it comes out of his mouth. So you'll always know where you stand, what you're doing wrong. It'll be shown to you on video. It'll be broken down, and you'll be held to a standard. And everybody's held to the same standard of what they can control, but not everybody's held to the same standard of performance, because some players are capable of performing at different levels. And Torts understands that.
Yeah, and also like growing up as a kid, this was like in the early 2000s. The Boston Bruins and the Philadelphia Flyers were the two teams that you wouldn't want to mess around with. And I find that throughout the years, and we spoke about this in a very past episode, I find the Flyers kind of lost that, and I feel like now with John Tortorella there, he's gonna bring back that aggressiveness and you don't want to mess with us, kind of culture going on there.
Oh well, absolutely. I've kind of referred to this as overcorrecting the steering wheel, and running your car into a ditch. They were the Broad Street Bullies forever. We know the game's not that anymore. You can't go out and just beat the shit out of the opponent. Can't do it. So that's not the game. That's not where it is right now. But in trying to shed that persona, they overcompensated too far the other way, and they became way too soft. Look at the teams that have success, especially in the playoffs. Look what they've all added to have that success. Go back to Tampa. They got swept by Columbus, Torts' team. They went out and they got Pat Maroon. They went out, they got Blake Coleman and Barclay Goodrow. Hardly highly skilled players. Guys that give you a lot of, sandpaper and a little grit and some tenacity and some ass to your team, some accountability for the opposition. You have to have it. And they've been undersized, and even there's guys with size aren't guys that necessarily play a big physical game. Like Kevin Hayes is a big guy, Couturier is a big guy, but they don't play a big, heavy physical game. So you need to have some of that accountability. Now you can't go too far. You can't go out there because you got Nick Delaria and start trying to fight everybody. That's not the league anymore. And you have to have skill, and they lack skill. They lack a guy that can jump over the boards, and the other team goes, "Oh shit, he's on the ice." We got to really be on it here. Mind our gaps. Can't lose this guy in any coverage, because if we do for even a second, we're pulling the puck out of the back of our net. They don't have that guy right now. They need that guy.
Yeah.
But how they get that guy could be through the draft, could be through a free agency signing when they shed some cap space. The best way to do it's through the draft, but they need to find that element. They need that high-end talent acquisition at some point.
Well,
in terms of what we're talking about, that grit and that attitude that they once had, the last time I would assume that they played like that is when they had Mike Richards, Chris Pronger, Claude Giroux in his prime, Scott Hartnell, Jeff Carter. That team, played with grit. They were the embodiment of what the Flyers are supposed to be, right? And over the years, like Chris was saying, we saw, a transition into something that they're not. And, I would even go as far as saying that, the Flyers and the Penguin matchups are not as entertaining anymore like they once were before. And I think you would probably agree with that statement.
Yeah, I mean, I think sports teams have DNA. Ones that have been around for a long time. The Flyers obviously been around 50 plus years. Same with the Penguins. And look at the DNA. I'll use another Pittsburgh team of the Pittsburgh Steelers. They draft guys that are Pittsburgh Steeler players, right? And with their DNA in mind. And if they come to Pittsburgh and they prove to be that at the NFL level, they stay. If they prove that to not be that, like Antonio Brown, see ya, packing, you're gone. You have to fit the DNA, and you have to know what your DNA is, and almost use it as religion. Now there's exceptions, but you got to find guys that fit your DNA. And like you bring up Richards, you're absolutely right. He wasn't a big guy, but he played the game with that DNA. He played the game and spilled it at every chance he got. He was a winner and would do it whatever it took to win. And, guys like Hartnell and guys like, Carter, all those guys and on those teams, Simone Gagne, Danny Briere, those teams that in like 2010, then you had Pronger at the 2009 draft. And I mean, when Prongs is on the team or he's on the ice, you know it, because there's no such thing as free lunch. You want to come in his area, you'll know you were there, and you'll have the bruises for a couple of days as proof, because he was one vicious son of a bitch. Like talking to guys that played against him, he was just a relentless nightmare to deal with anytime you were near him.
And I think you mentioned DNA, right? And obviously there's you talked about the Penguins' DNA and Philly's DNA. John Tortorella's DNA, I think, for a long time has always been defensive hockey and defensive structure. And I think he's always been a defensive first coach. I think we've seen that in during his tenures in the NHL. And I think I'm curious more to know, looking at the Philly decor. They've added Tony Deangelo, Rasmus Ristolainen, which I still don't understand why they made that trade, but anyways. They have Provorov, Sanheim as well, and obviously Cam York, who's their rookie defenseman, who is projected to be a top 4 defenseman in the league. Do you think that under Tortorella, and obviously I think the expectation is that it will be, but just that a lot of these guys, the Provorovs, the Sanheims, the Ristolainens, that are going to become better defensive players moving forward here, because we all know, like you mentioned Werenski and Seth Jones, 2 guys that under Tortorella thrived in his system and really, played solid defense. And we know that Rasmus Ristolainen and especially Tony Deangelo have trouble, defensively. They're more offensively minded players. Is there a situation where John Tortorella comes in and turns those guys around and maybe improves Philly's defense in a sense that it helps not only the decor, but even a guy like Carter Hart, who in my opinion is a really good goaltender, but hasn't had the defensive support in front of him to necessarily show his true potential. So just your thoughts a bit on that.
Well, the first part that you said, I kind of disagree with, that he's just a defensive coach. He believes in blocking shots and he believes in structure, but he's a guy that runs a very aggressive forecheck, a 2-1-2 forecheck. Okay. It's a bit of a sellout forecheck, and he wants his defenseman to get up the ice, join the rush, and create that 5-man up the ice and options. So it's not just about everything starts from your crease out, always does, no matter who the coach is. But it's not like it's Guy Boucher and he's running a 1-3-1, forecheck that was very passive and will beat you 2-1 every night. That's not the way he coaches or he believes. He wants his skilled players to make plays, which is why I think Werenski in particular really thrived under him. And also Cam Atkinson had a 41-goal year and a 35-goal year with Torts as the coach. But as far as the defense, first team defense in hockey is just not the defenseman. It's the 5-man unit. Yeah. And I think that was a big part of the problem defensively the last 2 years, is that the 5-man unit wasn't on the same page, not necessarily just the defenseman. So, too many guys fly in the zone, wingers leaving early, and, a puck doesn't get out, and then it's an odd man rush on a quick turnover and a recoil. Guys just going like a moth to a flame to the right side because that's where the puck is. That left winger not taking care of his point man, leaving him wide open. There was a game last year, I remember that exact thing happening, and seeing the memes and the videos on Twitter of it. And it was peewee hockey stuff that you don't do that they were doing. But as far as Torts is going to bring a lot of structure, and that's going to help the D, because he's not going to tolerate wingers flying in the zone. And, the center's not doing the right thing in support of the puck. And he's not going to accept, when you got to turn your back and go into the corner for a puck that you're not going to get there first. And and win that board battle. So those are all parts of the equation from the D zone structure that I anticipate will be improved, and by proxy, there'll be a better team defensively. Defending less it would be helpful too, but we'll have to see how that part plays out and how much they can play in the offensive zone. The game's all about owning the puck, and you got to get they didn't own the puck nearly enough the last 2 years. And then to kind of touch on your last point regarding Carter Hart, I mean, I preach about this all the time. Environment in goaltending matters so much. It's not everything, but it's just about everything. And I brought this example up. Thomas Greiss and Jarl Halak were in New York with the Islanders in 2017-18. They gave up the most goals in the NHL that year. Each goalie had a save percentage sub 900. They gave up the most goals with Doug Wade as the coach. The next year, Barry Trotz came in and brought his structure and his D, commitment to D and doing the right things in the 5-man unit in the D zone. They shaved off 102 goals year to year. They gave up 102 less. They gave up the most the year before. They gave up the least the year after. Same two goalies. Their save percentage was sub 900 in the last year under Doug Wade. Next year, the lowest save percentage was 919. The other was 925. Two goalies that they said couldn't stop a beach ball from the blue line the year prior. Environment changed. Environment and predictability improved. And all of a sudden, they could make saves. Why is that? There was a game last year for the Flyers. They were playing against the Bruins. Flyers go down 3-1 in the game. All three Bruins goals scored on Carter Hart's blocker side back door. Man not covered, right?
Yeah.
Fourth goal that they score, Brad Marchand standing on the right hat, just inside the top of the circle on Carter's glove side. What's Carter doing? Absolutely leaning to the right because he's been touched up 3 times on the back door. As soon as he leaned to the right a little bit and tried to cheat, Marchand beat him short side on the glove. Can't do that in the NHL. It's too unforgiving. They're too good at shooters. They know when your left leg or your right leg is loaded and you're trying to cheat, they'll exploit it. That's exactly what Marchand did.
And in terms of like what happened last offseason, because the moves they made, show that the Flyers were going in for a playoff spot, and there was high expectations. They added Ristolainen, they traded Jakub Voracek for Cam Atkinson. I just want to have your thoughts on terms of like what happened under Vigneault at the start of the season. Why didn't they play like the team that they were supposed to?
It's a good question. I mean, obviously injuries played a big part in it. Ellis only played in 4 of the first, I think, 6 or 8 games. They got off to a pretty decent start. Then Couturier got hurt about 10 games in, and he tried to labor through it. And you could tell he was hurt when he wasn't having success in the faceoff circle. There was something bothering him. It was the back. So injuries did play a part, and it snowballed on them, and they played poorly. And at some point, probably in the bubble, even prior to that, is when the Vigneault started to lose the team. I don't know what happened in the bubble. I wasn't there, but something happened where he started to lose the team. And it was weird because in that year after the bubble, he was really harsh on Carter and questioning his work ethic. And if you guys know anything about Carter Hart, he does not have work ethic issues. He doesn't have issues of being a pro and taking his goaltending craft very seriously. And that rubbed a lot of players the wrong way. It really did. And I think that was the end for Vigneault. And I mean, he got disconnected from the team too, where he stopped doing video sessions. It was like, what is going on here? So it just didn't work out. And it was hard to believe after, year one that, as good as things went in the second half of that season in particular, I mean, they didn't lose back-to-back games from January 3rd till they went down 3-1 against the Islanders in the second round in the bubble. And they were a legitimately good team, 7th in scoring, 7th in goals allowed, good power play, real good penalty kill. I mean, the only additions they made from that Hackstall team to that team was, obviously they signed Kevin Hayes, but they didn't have Nolan Patrick. And then they went out and they made the deal with Gudas for Niskanen, and they brought in Tyler Pitlick, and it changed everything. But the wheels fell off, how they, handled the pandemic. Everybody dealt with it. I think some teams dealt with it and some players dealt with it obviously better than others. And they obviously didn't deal with it good. and it snowballed on them, and then it turned into this year as well. And it's been a real low point for the organization for the last 2 years, seeing where they went from where they were in 1920 pre-pandemic to where they are right now.
And I think like one of the things too that's really interesting, just in terms of Philly, and I think if you look at their roster, obviously last year they traded away Claude Giroux, who was their captain for so many years and was a big part of the Philly organization. But I look at this roster on paper, and I'm not like there's no wow factor anymore. I think Joel Farabee's a guy that I really like. I think he's a young player that's got a lot of potential to become a decent player in the NHL. But, like you said, he's going to miss the start of the year. Besides that, I haven't really been impressed with anybody. I know Konechny had a decent year a couple of years ago, but the last couple of years he's kind of underperformed. And that could be, coaching and other factors as well. But one guy that I'm kind of curious about or someone that I'm excited to see is Bobby Brink. There's been a lot of excitement about him, especially in Philly. And so I look at this forward core, and I'm saying to myself, obviously Philly don't really have cap space at the moment. They're actually over the cap. But one guy that's been talked about potentially moving cap, and just kind of asking you this question: do you think they move on from a guy like James Van Riemsdyk, or do you think that before the season starts, Philly makes any move to kind of to address their forward core or to address a need? And if they do decide to move a forward or a player, who do you think that would be? I think Van Riemsdyk's likely the guy gone, but his cap hit's not the best either. So I don't know if you have any ideas.
Well, I mean, he's got 1 year left. They can retain half of it.
Yeah.
So when you get to the deadline, yeah, he's absolutely a guy. Is he going to yield you a big return? Probably not. I'm sure they tried to move him this offseason, but were unable to, and the price became really exorbitant. 2023 first, which I would have never done for a guy with 1 year left in the situation the Flyers are in, especially when the draft looks like it does next year. I mean, It's going to be a great class, and you can't miss an opportunity like that. So, Konechny's an interesting one because three 24-goal seasons in a row, and the last one that he had where he scored 24 was the 1920 season. He did it in 69 games, which was essentially a 30-goal pace. He was an all-star that year. But since the bubble, didn't score in the bubble, and has been really erratic since. So he's an interesting one. But I agree with you that, there's, like I said before, there's not a player that scares the shit out of the opposition when he jumps over the boards. There's not a guy that can go out there like Braden Point or Kucherov or like Sebastian Aho or like Austin Matthews or Mitch Marner, or, there's not one of those lethal offensive players. Last year, watching, I said this a lot when I was doing, the game broadcast last year, a ton, that they just seem to have to work so hard to get good scoring chances. And sometimes you can't have to work hard. You got to just be able to get a good scoring chance off the rush and bury it. And it seemed like so many things, they had to create such mayhem just to score a goal. And that's where you just need that pure goal scorer that can go in, on a 3-on-2, get a pass off the rush and just fire it home. And there just wasn't nearly enough of that. Farabee I like a lot too. He's a bit streaky still at this age. We'll see if that evens out a little bit as he ages up. He's still very young. But he's a guy that I think certainly has 30-goal potential. Konechny, I think, has it too. We'll see if Tortorella can get him pointed in the right direction. I think the guy, the best player on the team is one with a big question mark, and that's Couturier. Because when you look at Couturier, ever since he was elevated into a non-checking role, I mean, he's one of the elite centermen in the NHL. He's not a sexy player. He's not going to get your butt out of the seat and wow you. And he's better even at preventing goals than he is at scoring them. That being said, he's a guy that per 82 averaged 30-plus goals, averaged, 75-plus points for 4 straight years. And if he comes back from the injury and is Sean Couturier, I mean, that's a huge element. He's not a guy that's, one of those Austin Matthews type pivots or, a super dynamic player. But the last I checked, the game is all about goal differential. Whoever scores more wins. So preventing goals is just as important as scoring them. Thing is with him, he does both. He's great at preventing opportunities, and he's also been a really good offensive player.
In terms of like the moves that they made this offseason, adding Nicolas Deslauriers, drafting Cutter Gauthier, bringing back Justin Braun, out of all like those moves, that I just mentioned, are you a fan of the moves that they made? Also, obviously adding Tony Deangelo at the draft as well. Were you okay with those moves, or do you feel like they had to go after some other guy in terms of trying to address the needs on their roster?
I'll tell you the move that I had the least problem with was the least consequential one, Justin Braun, to play third pairing right side with a young player like Cam York. I think that's a good situation for the team because I think he's a good third pairing guy at this point in his career. The cap hit obviously is not that much. He's a seasoned pro and he can play alongside Cam York 17, 18, maybe 19 minutes a night, and that'll really help York too in his development. So I like that move. The Deangelo move, there's a couple ways you have to look at it. You have to look at it first for the hockey part of it, which is a bit of there's elements that are head scratcher for me because, again, is he going to be top pairing guy? Can Provorov be to Deangelo what Slavin was? I don't know. So that's a question mark. And then because you look at the money, you go, okay, $5 million is too much if he's a third pairing guy. You can't pay a third pairing right side guy that much, even if he's a power play specialist like he is as well. And then you got to compartmentalize it. You got to go, okay, we're taking on some risk with this player. He's got a history, and there's things in his past that are less than, good qualities to bring. Now, last year in Carolina, stick taps to him. He didn't have any issues. That's also a team that won a lot of hockey games. If it goes to shit, is he going to revert? He's a competitor, and he's a really emotional player. So if the result isn't there, is he going to turn into a problem? There is a volatility to that. So there is a question mark in that regard. As far as Nick Delaria goes, I was fine with Nick Delaria. I mean, I understand he's a fourth line player, not making a lot of money. He does kill penalties well as another thing that he adds to the equation. I just don't like the term. I don't like 4 years. I mean, immediately I saw it and I just go, why 4 years? And I know Chuck Fletcher said there was a robust market for him, and I believe there was. But, I look at it and I go, there's also a tipping point of where you're not willing to go. And 4 years for a 31-year-old fourth liner just seems too long to me. Because if you get to the deadline, that's going to be hard to trade him because it's 4 years. It's 2 years, it's no problem. But it's 4. So I don't like that element of it. I have a sense that maybe Delaurier was a player that Torts really wanted, and the GM went out and got him for him. Because I remember Torts mentioning when he first got hired that he mentioned that Sealer took on Delaurier in a fight. And it took balls big enough to carry in a dump truck to do it because Delaurier he is a man, right? And so I just had this sense that, okay, that's the first time I heard any mention of Delaurier around the Flyers. And then they end up signing him. To me, that could be one of those elements, like Torts saying, I need this guy. We can't get pushed around. There's got to be accountability for the opposition. This is the guy to do it. So I'm not positive on that. I'm just kind of piecing the things together, but it seems to make sense to me.
I think one of the most confusing things, I think, for me watching it from a neutral perspective and just looking at Philly as a whole is I don't think they've committed to anything. Like I think one of the things that I've been really confused about is what's Philly's plan here? Are they trying to make the playoffs right away? Are they going for a rebuild? Are they going for a retool? And it seems like from the press conferences that Chuck Fletcher had, it seems like he's kind of even not sure what this team is going to be. And so I think that, I look at it from a neutral perspective and I'm like, okay, I personally look at Philly and I go, they're not where they're supposed to be. And I look at where the Metro Division is and I go, this team has a first-round pick next year that is potentially going to be a top 10 pick based on the fact that they're in a tough division. And I think a top 10 pick in this year's draft is not something to be upset about because look at the draft and look how good it's going to be. But just in terms of that, I think I don't really understand where Philly's mind is at long term. Like, are they going to be a team that is going to go through a 4 or 5 year rebuild? Or is this the type of team that's going to, try to poke holes and maybe compete for a playoff spot next year again. I don't know. And I think bringing in Tony Deangelo, like you said, is this going to be a situation where Tony Deangelo is going to come in, Philly's going to struggle, and then he's going to get all upset because the results are not there? Or is he going to be part of a solution that's going to help this team, down the road? And I don't know, because I can't really get a read on Philly. And so I think that it's a bit frustrating in that sense, because I've always thought Philly was a good team. I've always thought that they were a team that, was just missing one or two pieces to really be a Stanley Cup, contender and a winner. And I just think they've taken a big step back, and I just don't know if they have any big plans for the future, or it doesn't seem clear to me. So I don't know if you have any ideas or what you think it could be, but I don't know.
I can understand why a lot of people feel the way you do. Like, what's the plan? They told us aggressive retool, and that clearly wasn't true. And again, I think the messaging and what they've said the approach is going to be, to me, hasn't been delivered on. So that part of it makes you go, okay, do they have a plan? First of all, no GM's going to tell you his plan. They're just not going to be transparent enough to say, hey, this is what we want to do. But I think if you read between the lines, when Chuck said stabilization, to me, stabilization means let's find out who's part of the solution with Tortorella and who's not. And if you're not, then we're going to move you, and we're going to get assets, or we're going to make a hockey trade. And if you are, then you're going to be here for this rebuild. Now, the rebuild is not going to be a tear it down 4 to 5 year type thing like we've seen in Buffalo, like we saw in Toronto, like we've seen at other places. It's going to more resemble a rebuild to the extent of what LA did, which maybe you don't even call it a rebuild, you call it a recoil. You get a little bit more responsible cap wise, get a little bit of flexibility, and that'll be coming for the Flyers beginning next year. And you get, then you can start to get involved more in the high level free agent game. You get your foundational elements of your core together, and you can add to it, obviously, with free agency and through the draft, and you move forward that way. I mean, some of the players, whether it's Provorov or Konechny, if they have a good year, doesn't mean they're still going to be here. They could look at them and go, okay, we've raised their value. Now let's move them in a hockey deal, something like that. So there's all different elements to it. Yeah, they're just not in a position to do a tear down and rebuild. And I think, it's easy for people to say they need to tear it down and rebuild it. But you got to, what a general manager has to consider is this is a huge puzzle of cap hits and contracts and all of those things. John Couturier is starting year one of an 8-year deal. Kevin Hayes has 5 years left, 5 years left. Ryan Ellis has 5 years left.
He has 4 years left. But
Hayes does?
Yeah.
So, he signed a 7. So, he finished 3 years. So, I mean, those are players that are hard to, you can't, Couturier is coming off back surgery, not really going to be able to move him. Hayes is a guy that had 3 surgeries last year. Yeah, he played decent at the end of the year and looked like the old Kevin Hayes, but not a guy that's really movable right now. And obviously Ryan Ellis, nobody's going to take that. He played 4 games last year, so you can't tear it down. Plus, to have the stomach for a rebuild, there's no guarantees. I mean, look at Toronto. They're a dynamic team. They got a lot of talent there. They haven't won a playoff series. And they even went out and they added Tavares, right?
Yeah.
A bad move.
It's batshit crazy, right? That they haven't even won a playoff. The Flyers have won more playoff series since their rebuild than they have. That's fucking bananas.
Trust me, we're Habs fans. We enjoy the Leafs not winning playoff series.
Yeah, I mean, look, the Habs are in it right now too, though, right? Yeah. Because they're going to try and do this recoil. You can see by some of the moves that Ken Hughes is making that they're not going for a tear it down to the studs and rebuild either. They want to recoil quickly. And look how fast that dropped. The circumstances were wild with the North Division and the bubble and all that. But, I mean, they go from the penthouse of the Stanley Cup final to the outhouse, to the shit house. In a matter of a season, like quicker than you can imagine. And Dom Ducharme, who takes them to the Cup Finals, is out, and now you got a guy who was coaching Tier 1, minor hockey, coaching the team, and maybe a really good coach in Marty St. Louis. So, hockey's such a random game too.
Yep.
Like, would you have thought when the Flyers fired Hackstall, made Scott Gordon the interim coach in the 18-19 season, and the only changes were the addition of Kevin Hayes, Matt Niskanen, who was 33 years old, and he's not Bobby Orr, and a guy like Tyler Pitlick would change a team that much that they were the second best team in the NHL from December to the end? That's the randomness of hockey.
Yeah.
You never know. Things come together and we're with. Would you have ever expected a team that doesn't even have a first line caliber talent, that they can put on the ice game in and game out, like the Vegas Golden Knights in their first year, to get to a cup final? They didn't have a first line. They had 3 second lines, and a third line was their fourth line. That's why they were so good, right? So, and you got to be able to defend, and that's what Toronto can't do. And so you just can't, and you got to have goaltending, and they don't have that either. So,
You mentioned, the Philadelphia Flyers have to build from the draft. So everyone assumed that they're going to go for Juracek. They wanted to add a defensive prospect. Instead, they go with Cutter Gauthier. We attended the draft, and I so happened to sit next to 2 Philadelphia Flyer fans. And right before he was about to get selected, they were calling for it. They wanted Cutter Gauthier. They felt that guy was the ideal player to fit within the Flyers culture. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on that. Were you happy with that selection? Was that the right move?
yeah, I think we saw a lot of that at the draft and a little bit in free agency as well. A lot more piss and vinegar added to the team. Guys with size added to the team, and Gauthier fits that, obviously. He's a big boy and plays the game. He can skate. I mean, to me, like the comparable that I would look at with Cutter Gauthier, he's got great skills. He didn't score at an exorbitant pace last year in the USNTDP, but you look at his skill set and you go, maybe he should have scored a little bit more. Why is that? That's the question mark. But to me, he looks a little bit like Kreider, can move like that for a big body. Like, I watch Chris Kreider and I go, Jesus, this guy should just dominate. He's got every skill in the book, and he did last year. I mean, he had 50 goals last year.
Yeah.
But you looked at him and you just always left me wanting more, because I see that size and that ability to skate, the shot, the release, all of it. And, with Gauthier, there's a little bit of a gamble on the upside. And if he can play the middle, and that's going to be a big part of it. You want to be big and strong up the middle and be able to skate well up the middle. I think it's so important. And let's face it, guys, centers are more important than wingers. They just are. It's just the fact of the matter. And if he can play if he can play in the middle and, really be a difference maker and score at the NHL level, then it will be the right pick, pending obviously what Juracek is going to be. And, right side defenseman, that's not an easy find either. That's the other unicorn, right? So you got to, I wasn't, hell bent either way. I'm not a draft expert, but Gauthier is very interesting to me. I mean, I had a chance to talk to him from the draft floor when I was doing a show that night. I mean, he's a great kid, just unbelievable energy and confidence and all of that stuff. But we'll see what he does this year in college and how ready he's going to be after 1 year of college to turn pro. And is he ready to jump into the NHL, or is he going to be a guy that's going to have to jump into the AHL and cut his teeth a little bit and earn it that way? We'll see. But they need his development to be handled flawlessly, because that's been an issue as well.
And I think what's interesting too is one thing that I want to say too is just I look at Philly this season. Obviously, they go get a really good scorer like Cutter Gauthier. I look at the draft coming up this year, and obviously it's way too early to talk about that a little bit. But just based on where the top 10 is or the top 5 is, I think if Philly were to have another year kind of like they had last year, where they struggled and become one of the worst teams in the league, I think that they would benefit from having a player from this year's draft be a part of their culture. I think you look at where this draft is this year, and it could be one of the best drafts we've seen since 2015, right? So I'm curious, and I don't. You guys can also step into this as well, but I'm curious. Do you guys see Philly as a team competing for the playoffs this year, or do you just see them as the lowest, probably the worst team in the NHL, or one of the worst teams in the NHL, and it's going to be another one of those miserable seasons for Flyers fans? Because I think I personally, and I don't know, I haven't watched a lot of Philly hockey, but to me last year it felt like they underachieved a little bit, and a part of that had to do with injuries and stuff too. But obviously, seeing what Ale Vigno and everything that happened with Ale Vigno, maybe they didn't underachieve. Maybe they just weren't that good to begin with. So I'm curious to know your guys' thoughts. Do you think Philly makes the playoffs, or do you guys think that there's really like no chance of this whatsoever, and they're just gonna be in the bottom half of the NHL and that's it?
Well, I think any conversation about the playoffs is way too premature. Way too premature. I mean, they're a team that was, like I said before, finished 41 points out of a playoff spot last year.
Yeah.
Without significant additions, multiple significant additions. So I think that's that's not even a conversation at this point. But, stranger things have happened in the NHL. Yeah. It's not impossible. I mean, because you look at the division too. I mean, when is Pittsburgh's age going to catch up to him? Sid just turned 35 yesterday. Sid the kid no more. Sidney Crosby is 35 years old. Yep. Malkin, older. Letang, old. When is that team? When's the credit card bill going to finally come due? Right, with a lot of interest for Pittsburgh. You look at Washington. Are they a team that could drop off? Neither of those teams have won a playoff series, by the way, since they've won a cup. What teams are going to drop down? You don't know. Columbus looks like a team that's poised to jump up, right? I mean, you go out and you have Line. Now you have Johnny Gaudreau, so they're a team that's poised to jump up. Are the Devils ready to take the next step with Jack Hughes and that core and Heischer and Dougie Hamilton and all of them? So we'll have to see if, they're going to get goaltending. So you just don't know. But, look, when you go into this stabilization year, if they're not a good team, the payoff is a good pick. And hey, if it's an abysmal year, then you have a higher percentage chance in the lottery to go get Connor Bedard. I'm not a person that's into tanking because the best odds you can get are about 20% and which means it's about 75+% that you're not going to get them. Yeah. And I think that does more damage than anything. You can't put out an inferior team. I mean, look at the teams that tried to do that. Buffalo tried it, didn't work with Arizona. Arizona didn't get it. When they tried to get Austin Matthews, it doesn't work. I mean, look at this. The team, this is bananas. In 2016-17, the Colorado Avalanche had the worst record in the NHL by 40 points. First of all, how did they have the worst record in the NHL by 40 points with Rantanen, Landeskog, and McKinnon? I don't know. But in that draft, they had the worst record by far. They ended up drafting fourth because of the lottery. Yeah. Fourth.
And still got
Cale Makar.
That's it.
What a blessing.
Philly had Nolan Patrick at number 2.
Exactly. They move up from 13 to 2. And I shit you not. You can stem so many of their problems in a spider web back to one person, Nolan Patrick. Because, look, he would have been the number 1 overall pick, and Jersey would have taken him if he didn't have the surgery before the draft. He was the number 1 pick all year. And the guy has no belly. He's a mutt. He doesn't want to do the right things on the ice. It's a shame too, because he can skate, he's got skills, he's got great hands, but he's a mutt, an absolute dog, right? So you end up with that guy, and the 3 guys taken after Heiskanen, Makar, and Elias Pettersson, and it's just, that was known as a 2-player draft. The drop off was after 2. Heischer and Nolan Patrick. And the 3 players after him are all, definitely much higher level players.
It just goes to show that sometimes, we can analyze all you want, but sometimes it doesn't pan out the way that we assume.
Yeah, I would agree with that. But I think also just in terms of Cale Makar, especially, nobody was taking a kid coming out of high school.
He was junior A.
Yeah, that's it. He was literally junior. Yeah. He would nobody expected Cale Makar to come in and become this elite NHL, top 2 defenseman.
Become Bobby Orr.
Yeah,
that's basically it, right? He was, So I think that when people turn around and say, "Oh, but Philly should have drafted Kill McCarr," we can have that conversation with pretty much any team in the NHL and go back drafts and have the same conversation. We could turn around and say the Habs should have drafted Kachuk instead of Kotkaniemi. But the point is that at the end of the day, nobody really thought that Kill McCarr was going to be what he was, and the fact that he is what he is, it's part of being a team that developed him properly and allowed him and put him in a position to succeed. And I'm not saying Philly didn't put Nolan Patrick in a position to succeed, but there was clearly injury issues with him from the beginning. And, we saw that. And then he comes into the NHL. And like you said, he didn't put in the effort or the work in to become the player that he was at number 2. So, yes, to some extent, we could turn around and say, "Oh, but Philly could have done better." Yeah, but I think it's also based on the player. And the player needs to do the work just as much as the team needs to do the work. Because in the end, it's the players that are the ones that are on the ice. The coaches can't go and be on the ice, right? So if Nolan Patrick's not putting the work in, that's on Nolan Patrick. That's not on the coaching.
Totally agree. It's well said. And the other thing, like with Cale Makar and him being taken fourth, I mean, look, every year when I go to development camp and I meet all the guys that were just drafted, some guys that look like full-grown men, like Cutter Gauthier, like he's a big boy, right? Some of these guys, they don't even have hair under their freaking pits yet. Like shaving, forget it. They're not shaving. Some of them look like they haven't hit puberty, and you're stunned. You're like, holy cow, you look like you're in 8th grade.
No, exactly.
You know what I mean? Like, and I mean, McCarr's playing junior A and was a dynamic player, but wasn't playing at a super high, level of competition. And, you're drafting guys, you don't know when a player is going to develop his man body and his man skills. Some guys come in and they have the size already and they really hone that in. Other guys, it takes until they're 23, are just smaller guys, and everybody's on a different development curve. And I think we have to realize, like, some people, you like to look at it and go, like, it's almost like the polar opposite of drafting NFL players. NFL players are 22, 23 years old. These are kids that just turned 18. You know what I mean? Like that difference, those 3 to 5 years are enormous. So you're projecting a lot of times, and it's really difficult to do. And, with a smaller guy like McCarr too, that's, not the biggest guy. It's good on Colorado. They took the player, they developed the player, they put him in a great position to succeed. And I mean, I'm just stunned. Like, how did some coach not convert him to a forward with his finishing ability, right? Like, it's ridiculous. Like, some of those goals he had last year, when he gets in and tight on the net, like, his finishing ability is elite.
Yeah.
It's not just everything from the point and rushes. I mean, he's got everything.
Luca, to answer your question before about if they're a playoff team or not, I don't think, that's the right question, Flyer fans should be asking. I think the question should be, is this the year that they finally, try to figure out their identity? I'm just going to pull up, a reference here from Rene Bois saying, they're still in search of their identity. And, I think this year we're going to see, like, Jason was saying before, the players that are going to work under Tortorella long-term and the players that are not. And with those players that are not going to work out, they're going to be dealt at the deadline. And regardless if they do make the playoffs or not, the main thing is finding an identity. And, let's say if they don't make the playoffs, they're going to be, able to draft a top 10 talent in a very strong draft, finally get maybe that superstar that they're hoping for. Like you were saying, Luca, before, there's not one player in terms of their offense, that really sticks out. But if they add a top 10 talent this year's draft, there definitely would be. And obviously with Cutter Gauthier, being in the mix as well, hopefully he develops into the player that they're hoping to. But one guy that I think that I really hope, pans out, because, you trade a guy like Claude Giroux to, the Florida Panthers at the deadline, and people weren't really too happy with the return. People were saying that, why was Owen Tippett, the centerpiece of it all? But I think he's going to have a breakout season this year under John Tortorella.
Yeah, he's an important guy. I just talked to Owen the other day. He just signed a 2-year contract with an AAV of 1.5. And, he's a guy that his numbers at the AHL are excellent, right? But he just hasn't been in the NHL enough consistently and put in a situation to score. Now, when he got traded here, nobody on the team had more scoring chances and high danger chances than he did. I mean, I think he had like 10 breakaways. He only scored on one of them, but and he's a scorer, so he's going to be hot and cold, and confidence is going to affect him. But to me, watching the player, and he was a 10th overall pick in that 2017 draft that we were just talking about, he's a player that skates way better than I thought he could at the NHL level. Way faster, way more explosiveness than I thought he would have. Look, the return for Giroux wasn't insane, but when he only allowed them to speak to one team to waive his no move clause, Florida's not going to bargain against themselves. So, you get him and you get that first round pick in the 2024 draft. So it's a decent package. I know it doesn't help them now because the draft isn't even next year's draft. It's the year after. But he's a really important player. And I think the combination of Owen Tippett and Morgan Frost is one that needs to work. Those two played a lot together last year, and they seem to have good chemistry and be on the same page. They played against each other growing up in the Ontario area. So those two, I think, will be linked together. I think the other guy on their line very well could be Noah Cates, who came in and really played well and showed that he's an NHL player. You have all three elements that you need on a hockey line, an offensive line, with those three players. You have a playmaker in Morgan Frost. You have a scorer in Owen Tippett and a bigger body. And then you have kind of the Swiss Army knife guy in Noah Cates. So I think if that's the Flyers' third line and they can get good production out of it, that could be a big difference for them.
And Chris, what are your thoughts, about the Philadelphia Flyers heading into the next season?
Well, listen, making the playoffs, I mean, that's going to be kind of tough in the division that they're in. I mean, the East is like a complete powerhouse right now. Every team is pretty solid except for the Habs and, maybe Buffalo to a certain extent. But, like Jason mentioned, anything is possible. Like Vegas, first year in, going to the Stanley Cup, and, that team wasn't anything crazy. So, I mean, listen, they could finish dead last. They have a chance to finish, who knows, maybe like in the top three. Anything's possible. I mean, they have the players. Lucas said that they don't have like one guy who's like the all-star, the main guy of the team, but I think they're pretty balanced. And I think in the way the league is today, I think it's not a one guy sport. It's the whole team, right? So if you have a whole team that's pretty balanced all over, I think that's going to win you games. So I don't see them, doing as bad as they did last year. Obviously last year it's the injuries, right? That, cost them most of the games. But I think with most of the guys coming back and with the guys that they do have, I think they can make I think they can make a run at it, at least a wild card spot.
Well, I just going back to kind of what you were saying before, Chris, just like, I'm not saying that they don't have, like, I personally think Carter Hart's the face of the franchise. I think he's the guy that you're going to build around. I think he's your superstar, but he hasn't shown that. I think a lot of that has to do with the defense and the structure and kind of everything that's been going on in Philly. But if Carter Hart can get back to being the Carter Hart that everybody knows he's capable of being, I think Philly has every chance of doing, pulling a surprise or pulling off something, spectacular, because, he gave me Carey Price vibes, especially in the bubble. That year when they beat the Habs, he outplayed Carey Price, and that's tough to do in a playoff series, and he did it, and I think he did it spectacularly, and there was a lot of promise and a lot of expectation for a guy like Carter Hart going into it, and then it seemed like the last 2 years he didn't fall off a cliff, but the production where he wasn't there. So if Carter Hart can turn into the goalie that he was in the bubble that year that they were in the playoffs, then I think I think he's the face of the franchise, and I think that he's the guy that you build around in that sense, and he would be the number one guy. But I think in any team in the NHL, if you look at it, there's always a superstar talent when you win a Stanley Cup. You look at the Washington Capitals, for example, there's Alex Ovechkin. The Tampa Bay Lightning have a bunch of superstars on their team, and so do the Colorado Avalanche. I think you need to have superstar caliber players to at least help you win a Stanley Cup. And unfortunately, Philly right now just don't have that type of player.
Well, I mean,
the only team I think that kind of didn't have any superstar players and won a cup was probably the Blues.
Yeah.
I mean, because you look at Pietrangelo, he's really good defensemen, and obviously Ryan O'Reilly and Tarasenko, but that was more of a by committee team that won it. But I mean, yeah, you're right. I mean, look at Pittsburgh, obviously Crosby, Malkin, and Letang. You look at Capitals, you have Ovechkin, Backstrom, and Carlson, and Oshie, and then you have, Tampa, like you mentioned. You could just go on for a half hour, whether it's Hedman or Stamkos this year, and Braden Point and Kucherov. I mean, and Palat's like Johnny on the spot. It's bananas, and Colorado had it as well. So, and then having those superstars lets guys like Nichushkin or lets guys like Palat.
Yeah.
So much is focused on those superstars by the opposition that other players, especially in the playoffs, can be the real difference makers. Like Palat was so good in the playoffs.
Yeah.
Like he was just ridiculous, right? And Nichushkin was for Colorado. So it's bananas, but this is a sport. It's not like the NBA where you get to the playoffs, maybe 8 guys on your team play. In hockey, they all play.
Yeah, you get LeBron James, you're guaranteed going to the finals.
I mean, but and of the 48 minutes, he plays 46 of them. Can't do that in hockey. It's a team. You have to have a team. But to your point about Carter, I agree. Like, people say, well, why don't you trade Hart? You get a good return for him. You never know in your rebuild, recoil, aggressive retool, whatever you call it, if it's working, if you don't have goaltending. Because if you don't have it, it's like a quarterback in football. If you don't have a franchise quarterback, you're looking for a franchise quarterback. And if you can check that box, you go into every draft in a different mindset, knowing you're not chasing the one thing you absolutely have to have. And in hockey, it's goaltending. It is. I mean, look at the Rangers. What has Shesterkin done for them? Like pre-trade deadline, they were a team that gave up a ton of chances, but he bailed them out because he was just so insane.
No, exactly.
Here's the thing, though. I agree that Carter Hart is an all-star player and he's great, but building around the goalie, that I kind of disagree with.
We've seen that with the Habs, and look how it turned out.
Habs, that's marginal disease right there.
I'm not saying building around the goalie, but I'm saying when you have kind of to Jason's point when he said, "Oh, like you need a franchise goalie." Like Carter Hart's a franchise goalie, and if you have a franchise goalie, you'll be able to build around that franchise goalie to have a team that's good enough in front of him to compete.
Because, again, you can't truly assess where you are as a team if every time you make a mistake, you're pulling the puck out of your net.
No, exactly.
I don't know if you guys played. I was a goalie, but I know, hockey. From talking to guys, you can't play this game afraid to make a mistake. Because if you do, if you're afraid, every time you make a mistake, you're pulling the puck out of the net. The horn goes off, right?
No, exactly.
Everybody points at your goalie. If you play that way, you're screwed. You have to be able to make mistakes, knowing you've got a guy back there that when I do, hey, I'm not looking to make mistakes, but if I do, I know that guy out there is going to bail me out. If you can play the game free of mind like that, then you can truly assess where you are. If every time you make a mistake, like I said, you're pulling it out of the back of your net, you can't judge who you are because it affects everybody on the team. He gives up a couple bad ones. You're like, oh, Jesus, here we go again. We can't win because this guy can't make a fucking easy stop, right? You need that.
And I think, to Chris's point again, I'm not saying I'll do what the Canadians did and just rely on Carey Price. There needs to be a goaltender that you need to rely on because goaltenders need to stop pucks, and that's how you win hockey games, by stopping pucks. But I think that if Carter Hart can go back to kind of what Carter Hart was in the bubble 2 years ago or close to that, he gives Philly a chance to win every night. And I think that that's what your goaltender needs to do, is give your team a chance to win every night. And with Carey Price, he gave Montreal a chance to win every night. And he's done that in the playoffs. And he's even put Montreal in a position where last year, they went all the way to the Stanley Cup final, but they went all the way to the Stanley Cup final because Carey Price stood on his head, right? And if a goaltender does that, it'll take you a long way. So no, am I turning around saying Philly should build around Carter Hart? No, but he's the foundation that helps Philly end up where they end up. And that's just the truth at the end of the day.
Yeah, because you can't really build around a goalie because he's a man on an island in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
You want to have the box checked, and you want to go into drafts knowing you have that box checked.
Exactly.
And that just changes your approach. Because, again, if you don't have it, you're looking for it. And you got to do whatever it takes to get it because you won't succeed without it. So But yeah, I mean, you got to build around. I mean, the first thing they need to do is find that high end talent. And if they have a bad year and they end up in the Bedard sweepstakes, I mean, look, when Sidney Crosby was drafted all those years ago after that lockout lost season to Pittsburgh, the Penguins became front page Pittsburgh Post Gazette news. And 15 years later, 16 years later, they're still front page news because he's still there.
Yeah.
That's what a guy like that does. And then you have to put the requisite pieces around him. It's what Pittsburgh did, getting to 4 Cup finals and winning 3 of them. It's what Toronto has not been able to do, build the proper team around Matthews and Marner. And that's the difference.
And I know, obviously it's been a while now, but Claude Giroux obviously got traded at the deadline. We would just like to know what was going on in terms of, pre-trade of the Claude Giroux, and what's the future hold in terms of captaincy.
Well, the captaincy part first. Torts said he wasn't even going to name a captain probably by the beginning of the season. He's got to see how the dynamics in the room, shake out and who's going to be tasked with that and, who makes the most sense. Obviously Couturier is a guy in there in that mix, probably a guy like Cam Atkinson to a lesser degree in that mix, and maybe Scott Lawton. But I would expect Couturier to end up being the guy. But as far as Giroux goes, I've gotten, full disclosure, very close with him. I've covered his entire career. I've been doing the games and doing my job with the team ever since he came in. So I remember when he was a gap-toothed kid and, now married with 2 boys and, all grown up. And I talked to him quite a bit through the process, coming to the decision to waive the no-move clause based on how the season was going. And he's a guy that's really played it really coy because as a leader, he didn't want his teammates to ever think that he was jumping ship, because it's just not the way he is. He cares too much about winning and doing things the right way. And he was really, I remember talking to him the Tuesday before his last game as a Flyer, that 1000th game that Thursday night. And I talked to him on Tuesday and he's just like, man, I'm so conflicted. I don't know what to do. He still didn't know what he was going to do. And he was incredibly emotional that night for his 1000th game, knowing that it was his last game as a Flyer. And I think at that time, he still wanted to come back. I think once he got out of here, and based on my communications with him, that it felt good when he left to be in a different situation where he didn't have the baggage of his tenure, didn't have the baggage of the captaincy, and he could just be a player, at this point in his career, and go to the rink and be an important player for a team, but not have all of the history with him of his captaincy and his tenure. So, obviously he signed back home in Ottawa, and I think he's still got a lot of game left. But it was a weird period for him. He does not like it's weird for a guy who's been a star player for so long to not like the spotlight, but he does not like the spotlight. He's a real shy guy, and doesn't like talking about himself. So I think he was uncomfortable with all the attention that came with the 1000th game and all that surrounding it. But, I'll be looking for him to have a good year in Ottawa, and that's a team that you could be on the lookout for as well.
And I think what's interesting too is as kids you watch a lot of these players like Crosby, the superstars and stuff, and when you look at guys like Claude Giroux, you don't really expect them to ever leave their teams, right? Claude Giroux was the cornerstone in Philly. He was the face of the franchise, and he was there his whole career pretty much. And then you hear the rumors that he's potentially being traded, then waiving his no move clause to go somewhere else, and it's such a surreal situation, because it's like, oh my God, this guy who you never thought would leave Philly is leaving Philly. And so I think that it's really interesting that in this modern era that a lot of these guys don't end up staying on their teams forever. Like I think Crosby's probably going to end up staying in Pittsburgh forever. Likely McDavid ends up stays in Edmonton forever. But a lot of these guys, they end up leaving to chase, whether it's a cup or whatever it is. And I was a little bit surprised, because if you would have asked me like 2-3 years ago if Claude Giroux would have been a Flyer his whole career, I would have said yes. And then, you see where he's at now. He played in Florida, and now he's in Ottawa. I never thought Claude Giroux would have left Philly, and when he did, I was very surprised, and especially since the return was a little bit underwhelming. Mind you, there were circumstances to that because there was only one team that he wanted to go to, but I just think that it's a little bit upsetting. I think if you're a Philly fan to be like, oh, you've had such good memories of Claude Giroux, and to just let him go like that, it must be annoying a little bit. But at least he played his 1,000 game, because a lot of players don't get to do that.
Yeah, I mean, to play his first 1,000 games here, I think it was a really big deal to him. The ceremony was flawless. It was perfect, and what a way to go out. They come back and they win that game too, and wins were not easy to come by at that time for the team, for sure. But I mean, think about it. I mean, the prime of his career, basically the decade from 2010 to the end of the 20 season, he in the NHL has the fourth most points over that decade. I mean, you're talking about some big names behind him. I mean, you look at the only three players that had more points than him are Kane, Crosby, and Ovechkin. Then it's Giroux. Then it's Tavares. A huge drop-off to Tavares as well. Giroux had 741 in the decade. Tavares, 715. Malkin, 695. Stamkos, 691. Kessel's in there. Wheeler, Backstrom, Kopitar, all behind him. So even though the team didn't have a ton of playoff success since 2012, I mean, the individual numbers for the player are pretty astounding, right? I mean, you bring that number up to a lot of people and they're like, really? The fourth most points over a decade? Like, I mean, his production was off the charts, and oftentimes without having a true sniper with him. I mean, you look at 2012 and Hartnell, I think, had 35 goals or something that year, but he's never played with a true sniper. Never. Never had a Vladimir Tarasenko just to hand the puck to. Like, you look at Backstrom's numbers. Think about how easy that is. Feed Ovi. Okay? And he'll score. So he's never had that. So to put up the numbers that he has are absolutely stunning. He was a great player.
I always thought of like Claude Giroux as an underrated player, and like you were saying before, he flew under the radar over that whole span of a decade. People would have never assumed that he would have been a top 5 player in the past decade in terms of points. I actually thought that Claude Giroux was gonna come back to the Flyers. He was at least gonna consider coming back to the Flyers. Was there any interest on any of both of these sides in terms of Philadelphia or Claude Giroux's party?
Well, I think Claude initially did want to. When he was leaving, was, hey, okay, I'm leaving, but I'll see you soon. But I think the team knew they had to move forward. To do what they're going to do, you got to move forward. You can't bring him back in and go again. You had to make some tough decisions and some changes, and you got to let guys jump into that void that him not being here creates, both on the ice and off the ice. So I think that was important. I mean, what I kept saying all along, and there was no bigger Claude Giroux honk in the city than me, and I believe me, I've caught a lot of shit for it, was, no, you got to cut the cord here. You got to move on. You got to, the era is over, and he'll go somewhere else. And does it suck he doesn't get to finish his career here? Yeah, but sometimes life ain't fair. So I thought it was important that they move forward without him, so guys could jump into that leadership role and, really take a bigger piece of the ownership of the team by him not being here and the stature of the player that he was on and off the ice.
And my final question. I don't know if you guys have any final questions. Maybe it's a little bit too premature to ask this question, but you're a guy that's around the players often. We know how John Tortorella is. You know that he's trying to establish a culture that it fits what Philly is known for. What players do you think do not fit this culture that John Tortorella is trying to build, and you could possibly see being on the move by at least the deadline or probably during next year's offseason?
Well, I mean, there's a couple guys. I'll go the other way first, real quick on it. There's guys that I feel like he'll definitely love. And like Sean Couturier is a coach's dream. Like Patrice Bergeron is like the ultimate wet dream for a coach, right?
Yeah.
He's the perfect hockey player, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like the guy, he's perfect. It's so freaking annoying. And it's so annoying that he signed that $2.1 million AAV. But And he's still so important. And Couturier is that guy. He is Patrice Bergeron. Like, you look at Bergeron at the age that Couturier was at, and the numbers are identical. They really are. Matter of fact, the contracts are really identical too, that Bergeron signed at that time. And when you consider percentage of cap, it's even more of a discount that Couturier gave the team. But, so a guy like Couturier, obviously Torts is going to love Cam Atkinson. Loved him in Columbus, and Cam loved playing for him. At Flyers breakup day, I was in a conference room off Paul Holmgren's office at the practice facility, and they would meet with the general manager. Then they would come up and they would either meet with the media, and they would stop by and talk to me, and I would tape an interview with them. And Cam came in before his media availability, and we taped the interview. And then I asked him at the end about Torts. This is before Torts is hired, and he got up and walked over and shut the door. I'm like, yo, he's going to blast him. He hated him, but he just couldn't. We spoke for 15 minutes about Torts and just gave a glowing recommendation. So Atkinson's another one of those guys. There's guys that I'm not sure about, like Konechny. I'm not sure about. Torts could end up loving him, or it could end up being icy. I think he'll really like Joel Farabee. I look at a guy like Provorov. That's another one that I really worry about. One thing about Ivan last year was, it seemed like there wasn't a lot of self-accountability happening with Ivan in season. And then after the season at his press conference, he was really snappy and snippy with the media. And there were some things that happened during the season as well. And if there's one thing I know about Torts, accountability is not a word. It's a religion. And the only accountability, the most important accountability is self-accountability. And if that's an issue with Provorov, then there'll be problems, because Torts is not going to let that fly. You have to be accountable.
My final question, I would say, and just we were talking about some players that would fit Torts' style. I'm curious to know your thoughts on how do you think the relationship between Tony Deangelo and Torts is going to go? Because they're two big personalities. We know what Tony Deangelo did in New York, and obviously we know Torts' reputation as well. Do you think those two guys are the guys that can get along, or do you think that they're going to butt heads a lot and it's going to be a lot of conflict between those two?
All of the above. Because you're so right. Like, they're both like bullheaded Italians.
Yeah.
Right. And two bullheaded Italians.
Too, so it works out too.
Yeah. So they, bullheaded Italians tend to lock horns every once in a while, but hug it out after. Those two are going to, because they're both like, Tony is. I know a lot of people that know him from him growing up in the area. He is very emotional, like feeds his emotion. And we know Torts, like we've seen Torts since he's become an NHL coach way back when. That's Torts to a T. So there's going to be times when those two are going to battle it out. But do they hug it out is the question, like brothers, right? Yeah, like you can battle with your brother all the time. And, the whole thing about him getting in the scrap with Georgiev, like I thought that was totally overblown. I think that was just a last straw excuse for New York, because, teammates fight. When you're in a sport like hockey where you've got that many teammates, 23 guys or whatever it is, right? Not everybody's going to get along. And, what happened in that situation was Deangelo was going back for a puck in overtime. There was a miscommunication. Georgiev didn't leave it where Tony was going, and they lost the game in overtime. Yeah. And he said something to Georgiev when they got off the ice in the tunnel. Probably like, what the fuck are you doing? I told you to leave it and you didn't, or whatever. And they had words and it came to blows. What's the big deal? That happens all the time. That's not rare. Like, people were acting like, oh my God, that's so, teammates are fighting. You ever been to a football training camp? They kick the shit out of each other, right? I mean, we used to go to Westchester University to watch the Eagles training camps back in the day when they were hitting a lot back then in the NFL still. Buddy Ryan's camps, they fought all the time. There were multiple fights every practice, but they're your teammate at the end of the day. So it's going to be an interesting dynamic with those two. I don't think it'll ever be boring with those two. No. But yeah, they're both very emotional. I think that's going to be an interesting storyline to keep an eye on. I know Tony, I talked to him the day after he signed, and he's really pumped up to play for Torts. I mean, I think he's looking forward to being challenged and all of those things, and to come back home and play for him too, I think is a big deal.
Yeah.
And I would assume, I think it's gonna go well. I think at the end of the day, they're both gonna look at each other. They know that they're very similar in terms of personality. They both want to win. I think, like you were saying, I think they will go at each other at times, but I think at the end of the day, they will hug it out because they're on the same page, essentially. They
They
both
want
want
the same
the same.
thing.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I would assume that it will work out. And I think it's something that, that Philadelphia needs, in terms of like excitement level, having two personalities like that, clashing on the team, because that shows that they finally want to win. And I'm not, if I'm not mistaken, it was Chuck Fletcher saying that there was an identity crisis, obviously, but they didn't have that hunger inside of them to actually want to win hockey games. And now that
Yeah.
you have two guys that, have that mentality where, they don't take any, anything, too lightly, and they don't take any excuses, I think, that's, creating the foundation and moving forward for the Flyers. And Chris, do you have any final questions or thoughts?
Real quick on that.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Teams all say they want to win, because who doesn't, right? Like owners say we want to win, but saying it doesn't mean shit. The only thing that matters is what are
Getting
you
it
willing to do to win? You know what I mean? Like, are you willing to go farther than everybody else in your preparation and your effort and your diligence to your system and structure and all those things? You can tell me you want to win. Those are just words. They don't mean anything to me. Show me you want to win. That's all that matters. And Torts brought it up with me when I sat down with him a couple of days after he was hired, that the locker room has been fractured. And that's the first thing he's going to tackle, because that's not going to fly. A fractured locker room is not going to fly with him. And everything will be brought right into the open with a light shined on it, and they'll deal with it head on. And, he said too, if I come in every day and everybody's in a good mood, I'm not doing my job. I'm going to crawl up guys' asses and I'm going to push them. And that's who Torts is. He can't change that just because he's 64 years old now. I mean, you see him in person, you go, how the hell are you 64? But that's not going to change. And he's not a guy that compromises. So it's going to be every day. You don't come in one day and go, you know what? I don't feel like being the jerk today. I don't feel like pushing them that hard today, or I don't feel like holding them accountable. No, that's every day with Torts. That never wavers. And when the players learn that never wavers, then it's like, oh man, damn it. He was serious when he said that, and we better fall in line.
Yeah.
And Chris, like I was saying before, do you have any final questions or thoughts?
Well, just about Tortorella, I think he's gonna be, like I said, fantastic coach. He's one of my favorite coaches, probably in the league, and one of my favorite that I've seen so far. And him and Tony Deangelo clashing, like I said, obviously it's gonna happen, not just with him, other players too. But I think Tortorella would love to have a player like Tony Deangelo, on his team. Like I don't even think they would. I don't even think they would butt heads. They would probably join forces to say something about some other player. That I wouldn't be surprised about that one. But I think, like I said, I don't see them clashing. If they do, I mean, like Jason said, Italians, they fight, and you guys become friends at the end of the night. It happens on the podcast too. We clash at some time.
Yeah, I mean, look, as long as it's coming from the right place, and if it's to hold a high standard to win. Look, if Torts is up your ass and you take offense to it because you're not working hard, or you're not doing the right things, you're not controlling what you can control, then you're not going to hug it out after.
Oh, I think that's just being soft. I think when players are like that, you trade them. There's
like
no place for
Pierre-Luc Dubois, he pouted and went out for that figure skating shift, and it was gone the next day. First, he was stapled to the bench. The funny thing is, Torts, I think this is hilarious. They make the Pierre-Luc Dubois trade with Winnipeg, and they get Laine back. And we know how kind of flighty Laine is, and how only interested in offense and stuff like that, and how that wasn't going to fly with Torts. In his second game with Columbus, he's not doing the right things in the neutral zone. So Torts benches him the second half of the game.
Yeah.
This is a player that obviously means a ton to them going forward, and they're trying to re-sign him. And Torts does not care. He's like, it's your second game, dude. Like, that's not going to fly here. I'll sit you. And he sat him. Like, that takes huge balls to do that, right? That just shows you right there that I don't care who you are, what you make, or what you think you can do. You got to play my way, or you will not play. There's no compromise.
Yeah.
And going back to when Vigneault was originally fired, we did an episode covering that, and we all had John Tortorella as being the number one candidate to replace Vigneault, and we said this is the right guy for the job, to kind of like bring back that resurgence of what they once were. And when it was announced that Tortorella was the guy, we're like, holy crap! That was the first time one of our predictions was actually right. So
They played Tampa on that Sunday night at Wells Fargo Center, and they lost 7-1. And AV was fired the next morning, and they played Colorado that night. So Mike Yo's the interim, and they literally had to play. They just come off a 7-1 loss at home to Tampa, and they got Colorado that night, and they lost 8-4. And I remember on the Colorado game night broadcast after AV got fired, I said there's two guys that they could hire right now. One of them is Torts, and the other one was Bruce Boudreau. And Bruce Boudreau was hired that night when they were playing Colorado in the middle of the game by Vancouver, because Vancouver knew that Chuck Fletcher was interested in him. Chuck hired him in Minnesota and was interested in him to coach the Flyers. They jumped quicker than they were going to after, letting go Travis Green. So those were the two guys, and I'm thrilled that they ended up with Torts. I think it's going to be more fun. Although I do love Gabby. Like, he's a great guy as well. Like, he's a total beauty.
Well, guys, do you have anything else to say? And that goes for you, Jason. Do you have anything else you would like to add?
No.
Perfect. Well, Jason, I just want to take the time to say thank you so much for coming on our podcast. It really means a lot. As someone that's really, recognized and covers a lot of, Philly stuff in terms of the Flyers as well. Being so close to the players and stuff, and having to hear all these stories from you, it's a true honor to have you on the podcast tonight. And we hope you had a very good time with us. I know we're relatively new in the hockey world. It's going to be our 1-year anniversary next week. So thank you for essentially, taking the chance on us.
Oh, no problem. The Young Guns podcast, you guys made me feel old when Chris said, when I was growing up in the early 2000s, I'm like, holy shit, I was like, man, I started in the media in 92.
The first NHL game I played, like video game, was Marty St. Louis was on the cover, and I think Marty St. Louis was 26 years old when he was on that. So yeah, it's
probably like
25.
Yeah, 05, 06,
yeah.
Yeah. So and now I'm seeing Crosby potentially retire soon, or Ovechkin. So it's kind of scary for me.
God, when I was in college, we used to play NHL '94 on Sega Genesis, which was the greatest hockey video game ever.
Yeah.
But it's I grew up watching the game in the late 70s. I was born in 72. I'm 50. I'm old as shit. But
50's young.
Yeah,
no,
so young.
I think I just retired from beer league this year. So
you still have half your life to go. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think I finally retired. I played from 4 to 50. And the last game I was in, I caught a nice concussion. So I'm like,
Oh, wow.
I wanted to just, my hips are so bad from playing goalie. I was like, I think I should just, hang it up here. I'm on the ice. I coach a midget team, my son's midget minor team. So I'm on the ice enough. I think I'm done playing, but we'll see.
Before we get off, actually, Rene Bois, one of our viewers, thinks that you should be hired from the Flyers. So
I am. I work for the team.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, like in a managerial role, I'm assuming that's.
Oh, I totally agree with that. I wish they would just listen to me more. We wouldn't be in this fucking predicament.
Do you think that you're better than Chuck Fletcher?
Every fan does, don't they?
That's it.
That's the one thing. Like, this offseason is so widely panned by the fans, which means they must have done something actually right.
Yeah, exactly.
Because there's nothing the fans would have done. Start listening to the fans, you'll be sitting with them. That's the old saying.
Actually, this brings up a good point. Since you have such a good relationship with the players on the team, if you were to be interested in a position, let's say, what position would you see yourself in?
in hockey ops.
Yeah.
Oh, geez, I don't know.
The GM.
No idea.
Go big.
Yeah, of course the GM. Yeah. No, I mean, I put it this way: the 4-sheet rink that is 5 minutes from my house. If there's good hockey being played there, I go watch it. I don't care if it's a U16 showcase or whatever. So, like, I would love scouting, like just going, to little barns all over different levels and scouting. Like, I'm not delusional enough to think that I know enough about the business aspects of it and, the CBA and all that stuff to be a general manager. But I love watching the games still. Like, it got in my blood really young. I had 2 older brothers that were twins that played, which is how I ended up being a goalie. The goalie path is really always forged the same way. Either you had older brothers that played or you love the equipment. For me, it was both. If you have older brothers that play, they shove you in net to shoot balls at you in the driveway. So you end up a goalie. So that's what happened to me. And I just still love the game. Coach, watching my son go through it, who's 16 now, 15, but he'll be 16 in December. He's his second year midget. Watching him play and everything and get the same stuff out of the game that I got out of it. It's awesome.
Nice.
Like I've been addicted to it ever since I can remember. Like, seeing Bernie Perrant for the first time in that mask, I was like, oh my God. Like, that's that mask that you see right there.
Yeah.
Which was signed by Bernie, but it wiped off though because my daughter was playing with it. I'm like, oh, way to go. You wiped off a Hall of Famer's signature off my mask. Thank you.
Oh, man.
And I told Bernie, and he said, I signed a new mask for you.
That's actually one guy we tried contacting, and we're still awaiting an answer from because we would love to have Bernie Perrant.
He's awesome.
You know what other
Frenchie's
flyer?
the best, man. He's such a cool freaking dude living on his boat.
If the boat
is rocking, don't come knocking.
I love Ilya Brizgalov. I hope we would get him one day here.
Yeah, he's an asshole.
He's only good.
The universe humongous big.
Yeah, he was an asshole.
Oh, really?
Great asshole. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. There's only been a couple of players that I haven't really seen eye to eye with in my 16 years with the team. Briz was one of them, which is weird because he's a goalie too, but he was just so far out there mentally. For some reason, I never really saw eye to eye. All goalies are, right? But he was like a total space cadet, and he was just always trying to perform, which was so annoying. Like Braden Coburn, I never really meshed with well, and Shane Gostisbehere. I was critical of him on my radio show, and he didn't like that. But turns out I was right. But he took it personally, like a baby, and whatever.
No room for softness, right?
No,
So obviously, guys that wouldn't work well under Tortorella.
No, you better have some accountability. I mean, I did a radio show, a talk show for years, and as a sports talk show host in Philly, and I put my opinion out there all the time, and I'd have guys come up to me and give me shit about it, and I had other guys, that were cool about it. If you can't handle it, then don't listen.
And I think we need more people like that, that are not afraid to state their opinions and stuff. People try, keeping it too close to their chest, and they play it safe. And sometimes we need to hear the reality of what things are, right, in order to improve, right. So, I mean, having you come on the podcast and seeing it how it is, it's refreshing to hear, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, I've had coaches pull me in to show me tape, to show me that some opinion I had was wrong, and we would argue about it. I didn't think at points in AV's tenure that they should be running a 2-1-2 check because they didn't have the pieces to execute it. They couldn't get in and pressure. F1 couldn't get in and pressure the D with the puck. F2 couldn't get there and take away the D-to-D pass. So it wasn't working. I'm like, why are you keep doing this? You don't have the personnel to do this right now. And they kept doing it. And I was critical of that. So I have my opinions based on my thoughts on the game, and I may be off base sometimes, or I may just be some broadcaster or media or radio guy or whatever you want to call it. But I didn't care who they were. I just called it as I saw it.
And I think what's cool too is like us, like as fans, right? We watch the games like on TV or whatever, and so we have our own opinions. And I feel like sometimes too, especially in a market like Montreal, I don't know how big the market is in Philly, obviously because of different sports, but especially in a market like Montreal, everything that happens is criticized by the media in one way, shape, or form, whether the player's performing, not performing, playing well, not playing well. And so I think, what the problem is, and a lot of times too, we see this in other markets as well, is players can't adapt to the pressure that the media is holding them to. And again, it goes back to kind of accountability, right? And I think a lot of the times too, if you look at it from at least from a perspective of the Canadians and kind of where we're at as Habs fans, one of the biggest things that we want is when we do call out a player, whether it's the fans, the media, or even the coaches, we want players to be held accountable. And I think a lot of the times too, because it's a big hockey market and we're passionate about winning, it feels like a lot of the times players don't want to come here because they don't want to deal with that type of pressure of, oh, well, if I don't score 2 goals tonight, the fans are going to get mad. But that's just because at the end of the day, fans are passionate and they want the best for the team. But at the same time, there's also the business side of it too that we don't really understand. And as fans, we kind of overreact a little bit too. So I think that's just it's just part of the game, I think, at the end of the day.
Well, I think the Canadian teams are at a disadvantage for a couple of reasons. One of them you just brought up. And, you see when players have limited no move clauses that a lot of times every Canadian team's on it. And that's for a couple of reasons. One, like you mentioned, the Canadian media is very tough. People love playing in Tampa for a couple of reasons. One, no state income tax. So you can get paid less on the cap and take home more money. Just the fact. And then the other part of it is you're in Tampa. Like, you can go to the grocery store. You can go out. Like in Montreal, like Carey Price, he's going to get mobbed everywhere he goes. That's being in the NFL here, right? So
exactly.
And the Canadian media, people don't want to deal with that media in Vancouver. They don't, because everything gets picked apart, right? And there's a reason, I think, why Canadian team hasn't won the Cup since '93 when the Habs did it with Patrick Roy. That's part of it. Canadian dollar doesn't help. I think the league should find some way to balance that, because when you have a team or player that is considering, an offer from 2 teams, whether it's a team in Florida like the Panthers or the Lightning, or Dallas or Arizona or Vegas who don't have state income tax, versus a team like Canada with the Canadian exchange rate and the tax situation, it's unfair.
Yeah.
It's just unfair.
I've been saying it for a
It's kind of
while.
way to balance it.
They should make certain teams have certain cap hits compared to others.
Should be localized. Totally agree.
And here specifically in Quebec, 50% of this player's salary is kind of going to taxes. I don't know exactly how maybe they find loopholes, but a big chunk of it's like Carey Price not making $10.5 million.
No, exactly. And I think too, like, especially from a perspective of like where we were in the past too, the Habs are they're the most historic team in the NHL, right? They have they're probably the 3rd richest team in the NHL behind the Rangers and the Leafs. And so I think for them, they've got the money, but because players don't want to come here because of the taxes, it becomes a big issue as well in that sense. So if you have, kind of like Chris said, to have different cap space for different teams and how much teams can spend, whatever, I think it would allow even a team like the Canadians to offer a player more money because of the fact that they have a higher cap hit compared to somebody else, due to the fact that they also do have high taxes, right? And I think like one of the biggest things that I want to see, at least speaking from a Habs fan perspective, I think it sucks. Like, it's cool that we have guys like Suzuki and Caulfield, and you brought up the point of Carey Price. I got lucky. I got fortunate enough to meet Nick Suzuki this weekend at a hockey arena. And I can tell you right now, the moment we walked into that hockey arena, every single kid that saw Nick Suzuki freaked out. And I'm saying, like, to the point where every kid ran around the arena freaking out because Nick Suzuki was there. Yeah. And it's just, it goes to show you just like how passionate the fans are. Like, even for me, I'm 21 years old and I saw Nick Suzuki and I was like, oh my freaking God, Nick Suzuki's in the same room as me, right? And like, so I think that there's definitely a difference compared to playing in a US market where there's obviously different sports as well, like football, basketball, baseball as well, where hockey are not necessarily considered the high-end celebrity or the high-end athlete compared to let's say basketball or football, right?
Yeah,
Whereas
like if
in
you see
Montreal,
LeBron James like that,
that's it.
whoa. Like Allen
That's it.
Iverson used to bank at the same bank I went to when I was working in near where he lived in the city. And I'd go into the bank, and every once in a while I'd walk into the bank and I'd see a Bentley sitting out front. And I mean, the AI was in there doing his banking. No, Allen Iverson wasn't doing the banking. One of his buddies was, but he had to be there to do it.
Yes.
And you'd be in the bank, you'd be standing in line, and you hear that voice like, "What's going on, man?" The way AI spoke, and you're like, "Oh, there's AI." That's a big deal. Like Allen Iverson's a cultural icon, global,
Exactly.
or when Terrell Owens or Donovan McNabb were with the Eagles, or Embiid is one of those guys for the Sixers. They're larger than life. Hockey players just don't get looked at here to the same degree.
Yeah, well, guys, I think we basically covered everything. So
More.
yeah, and more.
We
and
covered
more.
other sports.
Other sports too. So I just wanted to say
I did
thank
not
you.
think there would be an Allen Iverson reference on this podcast.
Yeah.
I watch a lot of basketball, so I throw in some basketball, things in here sometimes.
Go back and watch his press conference about practice. We talking about practice. Not a game. Practice. He went on a whole rant about his practice habits. It's great. He says the word practice probably 78 times in 5 minutes. You'll enjoy it.
Crazy.
Well, I just wanted to say, thanks once again, Jason, for coming on. Wish you the best of luck, heading into the season. Obviously, there's a lot of things at stake in terms of, Philadelphia this year, whether if they're going to make the playoffs or not, what's their identity moving forward, how things are going to go with John Tortorella, how is, Tony Deangelo going to turn out in Philly, a lot of, questions heading into the season. Obviously, Couturier's health status as well. So I just wanted to say good luck on that. And if you're ever interested in in coming back and talking some Flyers hockey, we would be more than ecstatic to have you back.
Oh, absolutely. You guys let me know when. We'll figure out a time that works, and we'll make it happen. And just 65 days until the Flyers drop the puck on the season. It's not that far off, boys. You got the World Juniors coming up tomorrow, and hockey's going to wake up this freaking hockey media that's been in a slumber. And then we're going to roll right into captain skates, rookie camps, and training camps. And then here we go, off and running on another season.
Perfect.
Yes,
We'd also like to thank Renee in the comments section, for contributing as well. Thank you for that. And also, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, guys, whoever's watching, please subscribe to our channel. We recently just passed our 1,000 subscriber milestone. There's going to be a giveaway that we're gonna announce in terms of an NHL jersey of your choice that goes to the winner of the giveaway. So thank you so much, guys, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Young Guns podcast.